far away from the thunder of histories, great empires, and dusty battlefields, beyond the reach of Roman legions or the stone palaces of Mesopotamia. There lies a tale whispered by the waves. Tonight, we drift toward the vast blue canvas of the Pacific Ocean, a sea so immense it once seemed eternal, unknowable. Yet long before the compass, long before the charts and sextants of the Western world, there were people who dared to journey across its endless face with nothing more than the stars, the clouds, the flight of birds, and the dance of waves beneath their canoes. The Polynesian Navigators crossed thousands upon thousands of miles in open water, guided not by maps, but by memory. They sailed from island to island, Tahiti to Hawaii, Samoa to Aotearoa, their double-hulled canoes slicing through the ocean's surface like whispers of destiny. They were among the finest seafarers the world has ever known. They built a network of culture, trade, and tradition across the world's largest ocean, without a written language, without metal, and without fear. Tonight, I invite you to join me in tracing their story, not as a textbook lesson, but as a soft journey, a tale of wind and starlight, of courage and silence. This is a story of a people who listened so carefully to the rhythms of nature. They could hear islands long before they saw them. As you lay back, allow your mind to sail with them. Listen not just to the facts, but to the breath of the sea itself, to the pulse of their chants, to the creak of wooden canoes, to the dreams that followed stars. Let this history wrap around you like a blanket, soft, ancient, and deep. And while we travel through time together, I'd love to know, from where in the world are you watching this? What time is it where you are? Are the stars out where you are now? Feel free to share in the comments. I always love hearing from you. And if you enjoy journeys like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories to fall asleep to, or simply to dream with. Hello, my name is Sherry, and welcome to my channel. So let's begin. The sea has always whispered. Long before the first sails caught wind, before kings carved kingdoms from stone, and even before writing turned memory into ink, the Pacific Ocean spoke in waves. And someone was listening long ago, so long that time forgets the exact moment. Small groups of humans stood upon the shores of Southeast Asia. They gazed at the horizon not with fear, but with wonder. The waves reached out like fingers, beckoning them towards something unseen. And what's most incredible is they went. We will never know the name of the first man or woman who stepped into a hollowed-out log and paddled beyond sight of land. No song remembers them. No tablet bears their name. But that act, that simple, terrifying leap into the unknown, would birth one of the most extraordinary chapters in human history. It began with humble canoes and a deep knowledge of the tides. These were the Austronesians, ancestors of the Polynesians, who lived among the islands and archipelagos of what we now call Taiwan, the Philippines, and Indonesia. Over thousands of years, they slowly expanded eastward, island by island, generation by generation. This expansion was not chaotic. It was careful, precise, and deeply spiritual. Picture the world from their point of view. No GPS, no metal, no books. Just the ocean, vast, endless, and full of secrets. Yet, instead of being intimidated by its immensity, they began to understand it as something alive. They read its moods, listened to its voice, and followed it like a friend. By 1500 BCE, these early seafarers had reached as far east as Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga. This was no small feat. These islands are specks in the ocean, sometimes hundreds of miles apart. Missing by even a few degrees could mean death. And still, they succeeded. But the real mystery begins after that, because beyond Tonga, the ocean stretches almost 2,000 miles of empty sea before reaching the next chain of islands, the Cook Islands and Tahiti. No birds, no visible signs, no guarantees. Yet somehow they crossed it. This is where the story deepens into something bordering on the mythical. Scholars call this phase the long pause, a mysterious 2,000-year period where expansion seemed to stop at Tonga and Samoa. But why? Did they lose their way? Did storms swallow their best navigators? Or perhaps were they simply waiting, perfecting their canoes, refining their celestial knowledge, building myths to guide them? No one knows for certain. But then, like a sudden gust across calm waters, it began again. Around 300-400 CE, the Polynesians launched a second wave of migration. They sailed past that great expanse of water and began to settle islands scattered like stars across the Pacific. The Marquesas, the Tuamatis, Tahiti, and so began the era of the great navigators, those who would carry their people not just through space, but across generations of memory. It's difficult to describe just how incredible this achievement is. The Pacific Ocean covers over 60 million square miles, larger than all of Earth's landmasses combined. These navigators didn't just stumble across islands. They intended to find them, and they returned again and again. Each voyage was a blend of science and spirituality. The canoes, long, elegant vessels with twin hulls, were extensions of the body. The ocean was not an obstacle. It was a pathway, and the sky was a map, painted fresh every night. Imagine standing on one of those early beaches. A canoe rests beside you, its wooden body humming with prayers. Around you, chants rise like mist in the morning light. A navigator stands in the center, his gaze already on the horizon. He is not lost. He has memorized hundreds of stars. He knows how they rise and fall, how they shift as the seasons turn. He knows which ones will guide them east and which will carry them home. These men were not just sailors. They were wayfinders, part priest, part scientist, part artist. Every sense in their body was tuned to the ocean's rhythm, the shape of the clouds, the color of the water, the way the swell moves beneath the canoe. Each of these was a message from the sea. Their knowledge was passed down not in writing, but in chant and ceremony. Stories became star maps, songs became tools. A young apprentice would sit in silence beside a master, absorbing the language of the sky, the names of winds, the habits of birds. This oral tradition meant that navigation wasn't just technique, it was identity. To be Polynesian was to be a voyager. To live was to move not randomly, but with sacred purpose. As we float here, at the edge of this vast beginning, let your mind picture that early world, warm breezes rustling palm leaves, salt in the air, a canoe rocking gently on the tide, and beyond it, the open sea, unknown, unexplored, and waiting. It is from this silence that one of humanity's greatest navigational achievements would rise, not in the halls of science or the ports of empires, but in the hearts of islanders who believed that the sea remembers. And as the first stars blink into the twilight sky, we step aboard with them, ready to discover how they followed that starlight across the largest ocean on Earth. Next, the language of the stars, how the cosmos became a compass for the Polynesian wayfinders. Above the gentle hush of the waves, before the invention of paper maps or magnetic compasses, there was only one guide vast enough to match the sea, the sky, and to the Polynesian navigator, the stars were not distant ornaments in the heavens. They were tools, friends, teachers. They moved with purpose, and in their movement, they whispered direction. Picture the scene: a canoe, alone in the vastness of the Pacific. No land in sight, no shoreline to anchor the mind. Just the creak of wood, the sway of the swell, and a navigator seated in quiet concentration, his eyes not on the horizon, but above it. The Polynesians did not simply observe the stars. They memorized their rising and setting points with exquisite precision. This was their stellar compass, an invisible wheel of light that encircled them every night. Each star or group of stars would rise and fall along a fixed path, always in the same part of the sky. These paths, star lines, were remembered as part of chants, passed down through generations. One such chant, still remembered by the navigators of Micronesia and Polynesia today, might contain the name of over 100 stars, each attached to a directional cue. These chants weren't sung for entertainment. They were maps encoded in poetry, rhythmically linking the movement of the stars to points on the ocean. And in the hands, or rather, in the mind of a trained navigator, this knowledge became more than memorization. It became instinct. Let us pause here for a moment and imagine you're aboard a double-hulled canoe. The sail is down, the night is still. You lie on your back, your gaze drawn upward. One by one, the stars appear, first to the east, then above, then down again in the west. The navigator watches them rise, not in admiration, but in calculation. He sees Hokulea, the star we call Arcturus, rising in the east. That tells him he is facing south by southeast. He notes the position of Ki Ka O Makali, Orion's belt, its tilt confirming the season. As Hocupa Polaris hovers low in the northern sky, he adjusts his heading to match the remembered direction. The entire sky becomes a living compass. And he doesn't just use one star. He uses many, moving from one to another as they rise and fade. Each is a checkpoint, a celestial breadcrumb that marks the road across an ocean of blue. To master this art took years, sometimes decades. Apprenticeship began in childhood, often chosen through lineage or signs. A young navigator would spend countless hours in training, learning the stars, practicing dead reckoning, and memorizing vast star compasses where each point on the horizon was matched to a guiding light in the night sky. And this mastery extended beyond stars. The navigators learned to observe the sun and moon as well. During the day, they tracked the arc of the sun, how it rose, how it bent across the sky to measure direction. They even understood the changing color of sunlight and the angle of shadows on their canoes. This sacred knowledge wasn't recorded in scrolls. It lived in memory. It pulsed in chant. It was whispered in prayers before each journey. But even that wasn't the full language of navigation. The stars were the main sentences, yes, but the navigator also listened to punctuation from the sea itself. The swells, long before land came into sight. A trained navigator could feel the patterns of intersecting ocean swells. If the swell was striking the canoe from the left side and remained that way hour after hour, it confirmed a consistent heading. The swell wasn't random. It was formed by winds that could blow from thousands of miles away, like an echo across water. These swells curved and bent around islands. When multiple swells intersected or reflected from land masses, it formed distinct signatures. Some could even detect the subtle rebound of waves hitting unseen shores far over the horizon. So now, imagine the navigator again. It is past midnight. He sits in the center of the canoe, wrapped in a woven cloak. Around him, the crew sleeps. Only the gentle rush of the sea can be heard. But his mind is working. He has memorized where the stars should be. He knows the houses each one belongs to, the points on the horizon they rise from. He knows that he is halfway through the path of Sirius. He feels the slight curve in the swell and matches it to what he felt 2 days ago. He remembers that 2 days ago, a seabird flew northeast at dawn, meaning land lies in that direction. And so, he adjusts the sail slightly, a finger width on the horizon. This is not navigation. This is language, a language made of sky and wave, of moonlight and motion. Western minds would later marvel at this system, calling it instinct, but it is not. It is deep training, passed through centuries of listening. One elder navigator once said, "We sail with all of our ancestors beside us." And perhaps that is what gives this system its soul. For each star memorized was not just a light, it was a memory. It carried the spirit of all who had sailed before. To use the stars was to speak with the dead, unborn. And so, under starlit skies, thousands of miles from land, a Polynesian canoe would glide forward, not lost, but guided by heaven's own language. Next, we'll leave the stars behind just for a moment and step onto the sacred wood of the canoe itself, because what carried these navigators across the sea was not just knowledge, but craftsmanship, prayer, and the sacred vessel that would become both home and sanctuary. The ocean was not crossed with knowledge alone. It demanded trust, not just in the stars, but in what carried you over the waves. The waka, or voyaging canoe, was more than a vessel. It was a living companion, born of the land, guided by the heavens, and trusted with the lives of all who stepped aboard. To build one was an act of reverence. To sail one, a ceremony. Let your thoughts drift now to a grove of towering trees. Somewhere in ancient Polynesia, deep in the lush green of the interior, an elder places his hand upon the bark of a great tree, silent, steady, listening. He is not choosing timber. He is asking permission, because to the Polynesians, trees were not simply resources. They were ancestors, spirits, providers of breath. Cutting one was not a simple task, but a ritual. The tree that would become the canoe was honored, sung to, sometimes even fasted for. When chosen, it was not cut down in haste. The community gathered. Offerings were made. Chants rose. Axes shaped from basalt or shell, carved not with speed, but with precision, guided by generations of craft knowledge. Then came the shaping. 2 hulls would be carved from separate trees. Each hull needed to be nearly identical in length and curve, yet balanced like 2 dancers in mid-step. They were joined by strong crossbeams, lashed with cordage made from coconut fiber. A rope so expertly braided, it could hold against storms without fail. And here, in the cradle between these twin hulls, lay the soul of the waka. This was where the navigator stood. This was where food was stored, sails were trimmed, and stories were told under the stars. This small floating world became home for weeks, even months. Think of it, no modern metals, no nails, no engines, only wood, lashings, woven sails made from pandanus leaves, and the knowledge of balance. The hulls had to be perfectly aligned. The beams had to flex, not break. Every line had a role. Every knot had meaning. The sail itself was a triangle, not square, like European vessels. When raised, it caught the wind like a wing, allowing the canoe to tack, to dance across the wind rather than fight it. And yet, the canoe was not only a technical masterpiece. It was a symbol. It carried the names of ancestors. Its prow might bear carvings of gods, guardians of the voyage. The navigator's staff was sometimes adorned with feathers, shells, or teeth, talismans of guidance. Each waka had a mana, a spiritual essence. It was blessed before departure. Priests would chant to ensure protection. Sacrifices might be offered to Tangaroa, god of the sea, or to the guiding ancestors. There was no casual departure. Every voyage began with ritual, and every landfall with gratitude. Now imagine the crew, maybe 15 to 20 people, men and women alike, each with a task, each knowing their place. Some tended the sail, some cooked, some fished along the way. Others tended to tools and nets. Children sometimes joined, especially on migration voyages, ensuring that language, songs, and lineages traveled with them. Provisions were packed with care. Coconuts, taro, breadfruit, dried fish, gourds of fresh water. Fishing lines would trail behind. Birds might be released to circle and guide the canoe toward land. There were no clocks, no timetables, only rhythm, the rhythm of wind, wave, and will. And yet these voyages were not chaotic. They were deeply organized. Every person on board trusted the navigator, not only for direction, but for life. A wrong heading meant hundreds of miles of water. A forgotten star path might mean never returning. So the waka was not only a machine of motion, it was a cradle of trust. In time, these vessels grew larger. By the time of the Great Expansion, Tahiti, Hawaii, Aotearoa, some waka stretched nearly 30 meters in length. That's nearly the size of a modern city bus, afloat on an ocean with no end in sight. But it was enough. With those canoes, Polynesians crossed distances that would daunt even modern sailors. From Tahiti to Hawaii is over 2,500 miles, with no islands in between. Yet the voyages were made, successfully, repeatedly. Some navigators even maintained traditions of two-way voyages, sailing to a new island, settling a population, and then returning to their homeland to bring more. The waka were not one-way tickets. They were the threads that stitched islands together into a vast, blue-spanning culture. Each canoe carried more than food and people. It carried language, gods, chants, seeds, fire, tattooing tools, memory. When an island was settled, a new chapter of culture bloomed. But the canoe, it remained the first sentence of that story. Even today, among Maori communities in Aotearoa, among Hawaiians in the Pacific, and among many Polynesian peoples, the image of the waka still holds deep emotional weight. It is more than transport. It is origin, motion, heritage. It reminds the people that they are descended not from those who stayed behind, but from those who sailed forward. And so, as the stars rise and the night deepens, picture a canoe rocking gently on the ocean's breast. Its sail is full. Its ropes are tight. Its navigator stands calmly, eyes on the sky. The crew whispers quietly, comforted not by walls or maps, but by the strength of their vessel and the memories of those who built it. For in that wooden frame lies not just engineering, but belief. In nature, in gods, in themselves. Next, we will discover how the ocean itself, alive with motion and mystery, became a living book in the hands of the wayfinder. The stars may have shown the way, and the waka carried the dream, but the sea itself, she was the book. Her pages were written in cloud shadows, bird cries, wave rhythms, and shifting light. The Polynesian Navigator, above all else, was a reader, one who knew how to read an ocean that never stood still. Tonight, we'll drift with them, not by compass, but by signs softer than wind. Imagine again the open sea. The stars have dipped behind dawn's pale curtain. The sails rise with the morning wind. A hush lingers as the navigator stands barefoot, eyes sweeping not the horizon, but just above it and just below. He's watching clouds. To the untrained eye, they're nothing more than brush strokes in the sky, fluffy, floating, aimless. But to a Polynesian navigator, cloud types reveal secrets. There are clouds that hover low, thick, and white. They signal islands. Why? Because islands push warm air upward, causing condensation. Even if the land itself is hidden by distance or mist, the clouds betray it. These island-reflecting clouds are called na-au-pulapul, and they're as reliable as a lighthouse if you know how to read their shapes. Now the navigator glances down. The sea sparkles, but he's not watching the shimmer. He's feeling with the soles of his feet the swells. The ocean's surface is never still. Beneath the choppy waves and fleeting ripples, there are deeper patterns, long, slow-moving curves that roll across the sea, often invisible to the eye, but unmistakable to the body. They come from faraway storms, hundreds or thousands of miles off. These swells are persistent. They hold their direction, whispering of distant winds. To the navigator, swells are like multiple drumbeats overlaid, a dominant rhythm from the east, a subtler echo from the south. Where they cross, a checkerboard of motion forms, and when those swells reflect off a hidden island or reef, the pattern changes. He knows this. He's memorized the swell directions for entire stretches of ocean. His body, trained from childhood, registers the shift like a sailor hears a change in the wind. You or I might feel a gentle rocking, but the navigator, he feels a sentence, and when he steps lightly across the hull, he's not pacing. He's listening with his feet. Now he glances up again. High above, birds wheel through the air. Their cries cut the morning breeze, sharp, brief, and full of meaning. To many, a bird is a bird. But to the wayfinder, each species is a marker. Some seabirds, like the frigate bird or booby, soar hundreds of miles out, always returning by night to roost. Others, like noddies and terns, stay within 40 or 50 miles of land. Some, like the fairy tern, rarely stray beyond 10 miles. So, when a navigator sees birds at dawn, flying low in a specific direction, he smiles. Land lies that way. In some traditions, birds were even released from the canoe itself. A navigator would let one fly free, then watch which direction it chose. If it flew high and straight, it had seen home, and so the navigator reads again. Not letters, but wings. But there's more, still more. Even color carries meaning. The reflection of a lagoon, a coral reef, or shallow sands creates a faint green or aquamarine glow just above the horizon. A trained eye can spot this sea shimmer called tilapa in some Pacific dialects, from over 30 miles away. Tilapa is faint, almost dreamlike. A brief, linear flash of light that pulses across the surface of the ocean. Scientists now believe it may be an electrical phenomenon created by islands. But long before the theory existed, Polynesians knew to look for it at night. A brief flicker in the dark sea, and the heading would be confirmed. You begin to see now, don't you? Navigation was not just a science, it was a symphony. And the navigator was its conductor, tuning his senses to sea and sky, to wing and wave. No single sign was followed blindly. Stars confirmed direction. Birds confirmed distance. Swells confirmed consistency. Clouds confirmed land. Each sense cross-checked the others, forming a net of knowledge across the sea. Even the smell of the wind was used. On certain nights, the scent of fire, flowers, or wet soil might drift out from land. Navigators were trained to recognize the difference between ocean salt wind and wind touched by earth. And always, through it all, was silence. Modern sailors often fill their time with charts and radios. But on the open waka, much was felt, not spoken. A master navigator might go entire days with only soft directions, a hand gesture, a glance. The crew followed without question. Trust ran deep, because to follow a navigator was to follow the ocean's breath, and they succeeded, over and over again, not by luck, not by chance, but by reading the world in ways that modern instruments have almost made us forget. As the canoe sailed, the navigator saw the sea not as chaos, but as pattern. To him, every element was alive and speaking. The sea became a memory, the sky became a path, the canoe became a dream, and the dream carried them forward. So now, as you lie still, perhaps you hear the hush of distant waves in your mind. Perhaps you see a faint cloud, a flying bird, a swelling curve of water. If so, you too are learning to listen. And ahead, still ahead, lies the source of it all. Because every voyager carries a longing, a question. Where did we come from? And Polynesians had an answer. One whispered across generations, across chants and myths, always pointing back to a sacred origin. Every journey begins somewhere. For the Polynesians, the vast sea was not a barrier. It was a bridge. But every bridge must connect to something. And when the stars faded, and the winds quieted, and the journey was long and hard, they would remember Hawaii, not a place you could point to on a modern map, not a fixed island with coordinates. Hawaii was something more elusive, something sacred, a spiritual homeland, a place of origin, and, for many, a destination after death. It lived in their chants, in their prayers, in their genealogy. Ask any elder from the islands of Aotearoa, or Rarotonga, or Samoa, and they will tell you, our ancestors came from Hawaii, but where was it? Let us step softly now into the realm where history and myth dance together. The world of before memory. According to many Polynesian traditions, Hawaiki was the first land, the place from which the great canoes departed, the place where gods once walked, the birthplace of the people, the chants, the sacred names. In Maori belief, Hawaiki is not just the place where the people came from, it is the place to which all spirits return. After death, the soul journeys westward to the setting sun and eventually finds its way back to Hawaiki. It is not only the beginning, it is the end, the circle complete. In some tellings, Hawaiki lies to the northwest. In others, to the east. Its direction shifts depending on where the storyteller stands. Some say it was a real place, an island or group of islands in central Polynesia, perhaps Samoa or the Society Islands. Others speak of it as a dimension beyond the horizon, only reachable through death or vision. This fluidity is important because Polynesian understanding of place was never rigid, unlike the Western obsession with fixed borders and property lines. Polynesian geography was more about relationship, the connection between places, the paths between islands, the stories that tied one point to another. And so Hawaiki lived in the realm of story, a compass point of the soul, not just the sea. When great migrations began, from the central Pacific outward to the corners of the Polynesian Triangle, each canoe that left carried Hawaiki with it, in memory, in seed, in song. It traveled in the names of the ancestors, in the structure of the canoe itself, in the way the paddles were carved, in the sacred objects kept in woven baskets beneath the deck. To leave Hawaiki was not abandonment, it was expansion. And yet, in every new island settled, the people remembered. They gave names that echoed the past. In Aotearoa, you'll find rivers, mountains, and valleys named after places and figures from Hawaiki. The land may be new, but the soul was old, and those names were more than labels. They were anchors, holding the past in place, even as the people moved forward. There is, of course, the scholarly side as well. Linguists and archaeologists have long tried to trace Hawaiki to a specific place. Many believe it refers to the islands of Samoa, Tonga, or possibly a broader region once centered in the central Pacific. Some even suggest it links back to the Austronesian homeland, thousands of years earlier, in Taiwan or the Philippines. But such explanations, though useful, miss something essential. Because Hawaiki was never just a dot on the map. It was an idea, a homeland of the spirit. A navigator might set sail toward Hawaii or Rapa Nui, but his soul remembered Hawaiki. It gave purpose to the voyage. It told him who he was and who had walked the path before him. Even today, Hawaiki echoes. In modern times, when Polynesian waka once again cross vast ocean routes, as in the voyages of the Hokulea, the navigators still speak of Hawaiki. When the prow cuts through the waves and the stars gleam above, they sing chants of the homeland. They carry a sacred stone from their island to leave on the new shore, a quiet link back to the place before places. Hawaiki reminds us that movement can be return, not just departure. It's a concept our modern world struggles to hold. We think of migration as loss, as leaving something behind. But for Polynesians, to sail was to carry the homeland within you, and to plant it again wherever the canoe touched land. The canoe itself was an echo of Hawaii. Its wood, its design, its rituals, all came from there. The chants whispered to calm the sea, learned in Hawaii. The prayers for safe passage, born there. And perhaps, if we close our eyes now, we can hear it too. The wind in the sail becomes a breath, the swells a heartbeat, and in the quiet space between wave and sky, a name is whispered, Hawaii, soft as a mother's voice, calling her children home. That whisper stayed with every navigator. Every island they found was a memory of Hawaii made real again. But one day, a great leap would come, a voyage longer than any before it, a migration into the deep central Pacific, to places where no birds circled, where clouds no longer hinted at land. A test of knowledge, of courage, of trust, because after centuries of waiting, the people were ready. The long pause was ending. The stars were calling, and the vast ocean, once feared, had become familiar. The stars had always been there. The canoes had always waited. The ocean stretched wide, blue, and endless. But now it called more clearly than ever. And so, after centuries of pause, the Polynesians moved again. No one knows exactly what sparked it. Perhaps it was population growth, villages outgrowing the islands of Samoa and Tonga. Perhaps a great chief had a vision, or perhaps it was something deeper still. A quiet stirring passed down through generations, that the journey was not yet complete. The long pause, that mysterious period where expansion halted in the western reaches of the Pacific, had lasted nearly 2,000 years. For a time, the farthest reach of Polynesian settlement was in Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga. A tight triangle of culture and tradition. There, voyaging knowledge was preserved. Canoe making was refined. Star paths were memorized. Stories were retold and refined, carved deeper into memory like grooves in stone. And then, suddenly, movement again. It began sometime around 200 to 300 CE. New canoes set forth from those central islands, bearing chiefs, navigators, priests, families, animals, plants, chants, dreams. These were not random expeditions. They were planned migrations, intentional, sacred journeys meant to find new homes, not just to explore. Out into the wide heart of the Pacific they sailed, into what we now call the central Polynesian archipelagos. Tahiti, the Marquesas, the Tuamatis, islands so remote that missing them by a single day's sail could lead to death. Yet the Polynesians did not miss. They arrived, and then they returned. This, more than anything, proves the genius of their navigation. For it is one thing to stumble across a new island. It is another to sail back home, tell your people what you found, and then lead a fleet of canoes across thousands of miles to resettle it. We must pause here, not in silence, but in awe. The scale of these migrations is staggering. From Samoa to the Marquesas is over 2,400 miles of open sea. From the Tuamatis to Rapa Nui, even farther, no land in between, no compass, no map, only memory, stars, swells, the sea. Imagine the courage of those first canoes. Imagine pushing off from the last known beach, watching the land fade into a line, then a dot, then nothing. Day after day of blue sky above, sea below. The nights vast and quiet, save for the creak of rope and the soft chanting of the navigator. Every moment a test of trust in the canoe, in the gods, in the ancestors. They weren't seeking adventure. They were seeking life, because each new island meant new soil, new forests, new fish-filled lagoons, a chance for a community to grow, a new verse in the long chant of their people. In time, these migrations formed the beating heart of what we now call the Polynesian Triangle, a cultural zone bounded by Hawaii in the north, Rapa Nui, Easter Island in the east, and Aotearoa, New Zealand in the southwest. But at this point in the story, only the center of that triangle had been touched. The Marquesas were among the first central eastern islands to be settled, possibly as early as 300 CE. These lush, mountainous islands offered fruit, timber, and fresh water, essential ingredients for survival. From there, Polynesian voyagers likely fanned outward to Tahiti, to the Society Islands, to the remote atolls of the Tuamatis, each new settlement built on the last. Canoe-building traditions continued. Navigational knowledge deepened. Dialects shifted slightly, but retained the root, the rhythm of their ancestral tongue. Culture flowed like water, shaping itself around each island's shape and need. And with each new island, the memory of Hawaii went with them. But how did they know where to go? That remains one of the most haunting and awe-inspiring questions in human history. Modern oceanographers and anthropologists believe these journeys were guided by a mix of intentional exploration, environmental clues, and an astonishingly accurate understanding of the wind and current patterns in the Pacific. The Polynesians had long studied the seasonal movement of winds, how trade winds shifted from east to west in certain months. They knew which times of year made it possible to return home, and which would make a voyage one way. They also used voyaging birds, releasing them from the canoe to track their flight. They followed schools of fish, like flying fish and tuna, whose migratory patterns revealed the direction of undersea land masses, and most powerfully of all, they followed the stars. Each island group had its own star compass, a mental map where each point on the horizon aligned with a rising or setting star. A navigator could steer for weeks simply by shifting from one star to the next, like celestial stepping stones across the sea. It worked, again and again, and not just for exploration, but for return. One of the most remarkable truths about Polynesian voyaging is that they went back to bring more people, to deliver messages, to uphold connections. These were not isolated wanderers. They were network builders, weaving the ocean into a living highway of language, ritual, and kinship. And with each successful voyage, their domain expanded. From Samoa and Tonga to the Marquesas, from there to Tahiti, and then outward, ever outward, one by one, the most remote islands on Earth became linked, not by empire, but by culture, by canoe. A network unlike any in human history was quietly being laid, not with iron or stone, but with lashings, chants, and wind. And still, the great journeys were not yet over. Ahead lay some of the boldest voyages of all. Voyages to the northern edge of the triangle, to towering volcanoes rising from the sea, to Hawaii, and farther still, to Aotearoa lands colder and rougher, where the sun's path bent lower in the sky. The Polynesians would not stop. The sea was in them, and as long as the stars rose, they would follow. By the time the Polynesians looked south, their canoes had already crossed thousands of miles. They had settled island chains, mapped invisible roads across the sea, and built cultures out of starlight and salt. But what awaited them next was different. Not a tropical island crowned with coconut trees, not a sun-kissed atoll where breadfruit and bananas spilled from branches. No, this new land was wild, cold, unfamiliar. It would become known as Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud. And it would be the final great frontier of the Polynesian migration. Let us step back in time, just over 750 years ago. Around the year 1250 CE, a flotilla of great double-hulled canoes, called Waka Awarua, cuts through the Tasman Sea, far from any known island. These are no blind wanderers. Their navigators are trained in the lore of the stars, the swell, the birds. They know the direction of the southern lights. They have heard tales from oral tradition and whispers past island to island of a vast land to the south. This land is New Zealand. Modern science confirms it. Aotearoa was the last major landmass on Earth to be settled by humans. The last great leap of the human migration saga. When the Polynesians arrived, no other people had set foot on its shores. And what a shore it was! Towering cliffs, roaring rivers, fjords coiled with mist, snow-dusted mountains looming in the distance, rolling green plains that stretched beyond sight, birds unlike any they had ever seen, including the massive, flightless moa, taller than a man, hunted with coordinated strategy. It must have felt like discovering a new world. And it was. Here, in this land where the climate was colder, the seasons sharper, the stars tilted at different angles in the sky, the Polynesians would adapt. They would evolve. They would become the Maori. But before that, there were the landfalls. Tradition holds that several great waka carried the first settlers to Aotearoa, each bearing the name of its commander and its origin. Among the most remembered are Takitimu, Tainui, Tiarawa, Matatua, Kurahapo, and Aotea. Each waka was not just a ship. It was a lineage, a moving village, a sacred bond between homeland and the New World. When these canoes landed in places like the Bay of Plenty or the Hokianga, the people carried not just supplies and tools, but ancestors, spirits, gods. The land was named in their language. The stars were renamed. Old chants were sung in new valleys. The Maori adapted their food cultivation, switching from coconuts and breadfruit to kumara, a sweet potato that could withstand the colder earth. Even their architecture changed. New forms of housing with thicker walls and thermal insulation began to appear. Clothing evolved. The famous feather cloaks and flax garments were born from necessity and became expressions of status and artistry. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was how quickly the Maori adapted to a landscape so different from their origins. They hunted vast herds of moa in coordinated groups. They built fortified villages, or pa, on hilltops. They fished the unfamiliar waters and named each bay, each river, each sacred rock. Slowly, they created an entirely new culture, still Polynesian in its roots, but distinct in its voice. And that voice still echoed back toward Hawaii, because the memory of the homeland remained strong. Even centuries later, Maori oral traditions speak of the voyages from Hawaii, of the chiefs and navigators, of the arguments and decisions that led to the great departure, of the rituals performed before setting sail. And while Hawaii was always spoken of as the place we came from, it was never forgotten. Many tribes could recite their waka wakapapa, their canoe genealogy, by heart, listing the names of those aboard, the course they took, and where they landed. These were not vague myths. They were carefully maintained records, spoken and sung, passed from generation to generation. In fact, these oral histories were so precise that modern scholars have used them to trace the likely paths of migration with astonishing accuracy. Some Maori even kept maps made of string and shell, memory aids that mirrored the ones still used in parts of Micronesia. And so, while Aotearoa was far physically, culturally, climatically, it was never disconnected. It was a new chapter, not a new book. The stars still mattered. The southern skies offered new constellations, but the navigators adjusted. Their knowledge deepened. In time, the Maori would even track the Matariki, the Pleiades, as a marker for the Maori New Year, a custom that has recently been revived and officially recognized. And though the waka no longer sailed long oceanic routes, the knowledge remained in the bones of the people. The chants lived on. The carvings of the old canoes still adorned meeting houses, still whispered stories when the fires dimmed and the wind stirred. For Aotearoa was not an end. It was a circle completed, a place where the spirit of Hawaii found new soil, a place where Polynesian courage, adaptability, and memory created a people who would sing their own legends into the mountains. And so the canoe, once again, did not merely carry people. It carried identity. Even today, many Maori consider their connection to their ancestral waka as vital as their family name. When a Maori child recites their pepeha, the traditional introduction, they do not begin with themselves. They begin with the name of their canoe, the mountain, the river, the journey. It is a way of saying, I am not just me, I am part of something vast, something that sailed here long before I was born. And now, as we rest in this southern land, cradled by the shadowed peaks and the long white cloud, the journey is far from over, for the navigators will soon raise sail again, this time turning north, toward volcanic islands rising from the sea, where the sun leans higher and the chants rise with warmth. Far to the north, past the equator's warm breath, past the playful winds of the trade belts, and through seas that stretched for weeks unbroken, rose a new world from the deep. They were not lush like the Marquesas. They were not cold like Aotearoa. These islands were volcanic giants hewn from fire, cloaked in green, and ringed with coral and reef. At night, they seemed to sleep beneath a blanket of stars so clear, so wide, they seemed to hum with ancestral memory. These were the islands of Hawaii, the northern crown of the Polynesian Triangle. The name itself, Hawaii, echoes Hawaiki, the mythic homeland from which all Polynesians believed they came. Perhaps the name was more than a coincidence. Perhaps it was chosen with purpose, a declaration that this farthest land still bore the soul of the first. The people arrived here not by accident. The journey from central Polynesia to Hawaii is one of the longest in oceanic history. Over 2,000 miles of open water against contrary winds and currents. To reach, it required brilliance, courage, and above all, intention. Evidence points to the first settlement sometime around 800 to 900 CE, likely by navigators from the Marquesas Islands. These voyagers brought their crops, their animals, their gods. They brought their chants and their stars. And once they arrived, they stayed, their sails now tethered not by rope, but by fertile valleys and mountain mist. The Hawaiian Islands are a chain of volcanic peaks stretching like stepping stones across the northern Pacific. Hawaii Island, the Big Island, is the youngest and largest. To the northwest lie Maui, Oahu, Kauai, and beyond, older, smaller islands shaped by time and erosion. Each island held its own personality. The Big Island's towering volcanoes, Mauna Loa and Mauna Kea, rose so high they pierced the sky. On clear nights, a navigator standing on the canoe deck might see the stars touch their snowy peaks. To the Polynesians, this was no ordinary land. This was a sacred horizon, a place where the heavens bent close to the earth. But how did they find it? Once again, we return to the old tools. The stars were still the key. Navigators had long observed the northern skies. From Tahiti and the Marquesas, they watched Polaris, the North Star, rise low above the horizon. They knew that if they followed it long enough, if they trusted the wind, the birds, and the whispers of the swell, they would find something. And they did. The first settlers would have arrived to a land untouched. No humans had walked these valleys before. The forests were wild, filled with birds seen nowhere else on earth. Waterfalls tumbled from cloud-covered cliffs. Lava fields still steamed in the moonlight. And in that untouched world, the Polynesians did what they always did. They remembered. They adapted. They terraced the hills for farming. They channeled water for irrigation. They built fish ponds along the coasts, vast, ingenious systems that allowed them to cultivate and harvest fish with care and sustainability. And they created new chants, new gods, a new identity, one that still remembered the old. In time, the voyagers from Tahiti would follow. These later arrivals brought new customs, including the concept of Ali, a ruling class of chiefs with divine bloodlines, chosen by genealogy and guided by kapo, or sacred law. This fusion of Marquesan roots and Tahitian refinement gave rise to the Hawaiian kingdoms, a complex society governed by ritual, rank, and sacred geography. Mountains became embodiments of gods. Rivers carried spiritual essence. Every plant, every stone, every wind had a name and meaning. The oral traditions deepened. Chants were woven into hula. Genealogies were memorized, sometimes going back 100 generations. Navigation was preserved not just in technique, but in poetry, because the stars still mattered. Even though the long voyages had ended, the knowledge was not forgotten. Some families, especially the Kahuna class, held onto the sacred teachings. They knew the star compass. They remembered the signs of birds, the messages in the waves. And among them, some say, were those who could still sail by them. This legacy would sleep, like the volcano, for centuries. But it would never die. Centuries after the first canoes landed, long before European ships arrived, the islands flourished in their own rhythm. Villages lined the coasts. Farmers tended their taro in misty upland fields. Fishermen cast their nets in the shadow of cliffs. The old chants echoed through valleys, welcoming the morning sun. Hawaii was not isolated. Like Aotearoa, it was part of the greater web, bound by the common threads of language, memory, and belief. But it also stood apart, like a distant cousin with its own voice. Its people looked south and still spoke of Hawaiki. They sang of the canoes that brought them. They honored the stars that guided them, and as the generations passed, they carved their story into the mountains, into the skin, into the soul. And then the silence came. For centuries, long-distance voyaging ceased. Why? No one truly knows. Perhaps the need faded. Perhaps inter-island warfare discouraged exploration. Perhaps the rising of the sea changed currents, or the winds became less favorable. Or perhaps, after so many generations of movement, the people simply desired to stay, but the knowledge slept. Like embers hidden under ash, it waited. It would not be until the 20th century that the flame would be stirred again by descendants who refused to forget. But that is a story still to come. For now, we rest beneath the Hawaiian sky, where Mauna Kea meets the stars, and the ocean still whispers to those who listen. The journey is nearly complete, but in the far east, another mystery still lingers, a land of stone faces, where the sun rises last, and where the voyaging spirit took its boldest step yet. Drift far into the southeast Pacific, farther than most dared sail, beyond the known trade winds, where ocean swells rise in long, patient rhythms, and the stars appear alone in their vastness. Out there, seemingly lost in time and water, rises a shard of volcanic earth, remote, isolated, lonely in the purest sense of the word. This was Rapa Nui, known to the outside world as Easter Island, the easternmost point of the Great Polynesian Triangle, a place so distant from its nearest neighbor that early sailors called it the navel of the world. But for those who arrived here centuries ago, it was no accident. It was the final leap of a masterful seafaring civilization. Rapa Nui sits over 2,000 miles west of South America and more than 1,000 miles from the nearest inhabited island. It is not a lush atoll or a sprawling archipelago, but a single, wind-swept island born of fire, dotted with ancient craters and hardened lava flows. And yet, someone found it. Someone reached it. And they brought with them the entire legacy of their people. We believe the first settlers came from the Marquesas or Mangareva, perhaps as early as 800 to 1200 CE. Their journey would have taken weeks, maybe longer, across some of the most challenging waters on Earth. But they were guided, as always, by the night sky. The Polynesians knew the arc of the sun, the sway of the ocean's swell, and the songs of the stars. Even in this desolate quadrant of the Pacific, they followed patterns. They read the moon. They trusted the birds. And when Rapa Nui finally appeared on the horizon, it would have seemed like a world untouched, a thin crescent of green with volcanic hills and no human voice to greet them. But they brought life with them. Bananas, taro, chickens, tools, fire, language, chants, and they began again, just as their ancestors had done on every new shore. They carved gardens into the soil. They created fishing canoes from the island's once abundant forests, and slowly they built a society, one that would become as mysterious as the island itself. Because on Rapa Nui, something extraordinary happened. Something no other Polynesian island attempted on such a scale. They began to raise the moai, massive, stoic stone statues, carved from volcanic rock and set upright across the island, some weighing up to 80 tons, standing nearly 30 feet tall. Nearly 900 of them lined along coastal platforms known as ahu, their backs to the sea, gazing inward. It is one of the greatest enigmas of the ancient world. Who did they represent? What purpose did they serve? The Rapa Nui people believed the moai held mana, spiritual energy, passed on from deified ancestors. These statues weren't merely memorials, they were conduits, guardians, watching over the land and the people, preserving the memory of lineage. Each moai bore distinct features. Some wore puko, large red stone topknots, believed to symbolize hair or hats. Others were never completed, lying half-finished in the quarries at Ranoaraku, as if the carvers had simply put down their tools and vanished. And in a sense, they did. For Rapa Nui's story, like the moai, is both magnificent and tragic. As the centuries passed, the island's resources began to strain under the weight of its growing population. Forests were cleared, possibly for farming, firewood, or to move the giant statues. The soil began to erode. Crops failed, social tensions rose. The moai, once revered, became targets. Some were toppled, perhaps in acts of protest, perhaps during clan warfare. Oral tradition tells of the Huri Mai, the time of the statue fallings. It marked the unraveling of the old ways. And yet, even through collapse, the spirit of the Voyagers endured. The Rapa Nui never lost their language. They continued their traditions, adapting to new realities. In place of the old statue-based society, a new ritual emerged, the Tangata Manu, or Birdman cult. Each year, competing warriors would climb the cliffs of Orongo and swim through shark-infested waters to the offshore islet of Matu Nui, searching for the first egg of the Manu Tara seabird. The winner's clan leader would rule for the year. This shift from ancestral stone worship to a nature-based ritual reflected the island's resilience, its ability to evolve under pressure. And despite its isolation, Rapa Nui was never forgotten by its people. They continued to chant the names of their voyaging ancestors. They recalled the stories of Hatumata, the legendary first settler who led the original canoes from Hiva, an island remembered only in myth. Even when the forests were gone and the canoes could no longer be built, the memory of the journey remained. And the stars, they still glimmered overhead, the same constellations their ancestors had followed. They were no longer roads, but reminders. Even today, many Rapa Nui feel a deep spiritual connection to those ancient voyagers, to the ones who looked across an endless sea and dared to sail until land rose from the mist. Because reaching Rapa Nui was not an accident. It was a masterstroke. The farthest edge of the Polynesian world, the most daring leap of a civilization that had mapped an entire ocean without compass, sextant, or written chart. And as we rest now under the moonlight, surrounded by stone faces who have watched centuries pass in silence, we realize the journey was never just about geography. It was about belief. Belief that the world could be crossed. Belief that the stars held answers. Belief that our ancestors still walk beside us, even when the path disappears. But the journey isn't over just yet. Ahead lies one final story, not of a place, but of a people who preserved the knowledge even after the stars were forgotten. The stars had not disappeared. They still glowed above the waves, tracing their ancient arcs across the sky, whispering to the sea the way they always had. But something had changed. The voices that once sang their names fell silent. The navigators were still there, their bones buried beneath breadfruit trees, their stories etched into chants and remembered in the rhythm of waves. But their craft, their sacred knowledge, began to fade into myth. Across Polynesia, the long-distance voyages ceased. The vast triangle they had once mapped by memory and moonlight grew quiet. The canoes were pulled ashore. Their sails rotted, and the ocean that had once felt like a highway became a boundary once more. What happened? It is a question both haunting and gentle, not one of failure, but of change. By the 15th century, the great era of Polynesian expansion had ended. The migrations that once spread from Samoa to New Zealand, from Tahiti to Hawaii, no longer stirred the sea. Islands began to live inward. Their people grew rooted in place. The celestial compass, passed down from master to apprentice, was slowly laid to rest. There are many reasons why. Some believe it was environmental. Deforestation on smaller islands made canoe building harder. Climate shifts may have altered wind patterns. Famine, conflict, or social upheaval may have discouraged risk. Others point to success itself. After centuries of searching, perhaps the Polynesians had simply found enough. The triangle was complete. There was no farther place to go. But perhaps the real answer is more intimate, more human. To voyage across the Pacific was never easy. It demanded more than courage. It required ritual, memory, and unity. As generations passed and societies evolved, priorities shifted. Chiefs turned toward land management, warfare, and governance. The navigators, once the most revered of all, slipped into legend. And so, the stars grew silent, not in the sky, but in the minds of those who once understood their language. By the time the first European ships arrived in the 17th and 18th centuries, the art of deep ocean voyaging had all but vanished. In many places, the knowledge had already been lost. In others, it remained only as fragments, songs with missing verses, carvings with half-forgotten meanings. To the foreign eyes of these early visitors, the Pacific peoples were seen not as navigators, but as isolated primitives, shipwrecked in paradise. They did not know, they could not know, that the very ocean their own maps labeled as uncharted had been crossed and recrossed by men and women with no steel, no compass, no written word, only memory and starlight. Imagine it. A grandfather once held the knowledge. He had sailed between islands in his youth, reading the clouds and tasting the sea. He taught his son only part of it, fewer chants, fewer names, for the voyages were no longer made. That son passed down even less, until one day the child stood beneath the stars, feeling something ancient stir within him, but no one remained to tell him what it meant. And so it slept, like a buried canoe beneath the jungle earth. The knowledge rested, not gone, not destroyed, only waiting, waiting for someone to remember. In some corners of the Pacific, faint embers still glowed in the outer islands of Micronesia. On places like Satawal, traditional navigation was never fully lost. There, a few families kept the flame alive, passing down the knowledge through storytelling and strict initiation. Among them was a man whose name would one day reach across oceans, Maupiailug. But Mau's story that comes later. For now, we return to that quiet moment when the Voyagers fell silent, not in defeat, but in transformation. Their stories remained, wrapped in chants and dances. A child in Samoa might still hear of a canoe called Ali Mano. A girl in Hawaii might learn the song of Hokulea, the star of gladness. In Aotearoa, elders still spoke of Cube and the great waka that followed. Even in silence, memory has power. It lingers. It waits. In this resting phase, the Pacific held its breath. Centuries passed. Empires rose elsewhere. Maps were drawn without the wisdom of those who came before. Western historians debated whether the Polynesians had truly navigated at all, some claiming they arrived only by drift and luck. The truth that their achievements surpassed even those of ancient Mediterranean seafarers was buried under skepticism. But the ocean remembered. The stars still sang. And in the hearts of islanders, a soft ache remained, a sense that something precious had been laid down, and that one day it might be picked up again, because knowledge that is alive does not die easily. It curls into dreams. It hides in lullabies. It flickers in the eyes of children staring at the night sky, feeling something stir deep in their bones, something they cannot name, but somehow know. The canoes would rise again. Not yet, but soon. From the silence, a spark would emerge, and from that spark, a flame. The flame that would relight the way across the Pacific, restore the path between islands, and awaken a people's pride. The stars were still there. All they needed was someone to listen. Next, the reawakening Hokulea and the modern voyage. Sometimes, the past doesn't call, it sings. And one evening in 1973, beneath a sky soft with starlight, a group of Hawaiian dreamers stood on the edge of memory. The modern world buzzed around them, planes overhead, radios humming, concrete spreading across the islands. But in their hearts, they felt something older, something that whispered across centuries. The sea remembers. Do you? That whisper became a question. The question became a mission, and the mission gave birth to a canoe. Her name was Hokulea, the star of gladness. A double-hulled sailing vessel, built not of fiberglass and steel, but of belief. She was a reconstruction of the ancient voyaging canoes, crafted using traditional knowledge, based on generations of oral memory, archaeological fragments, and the instinct that history had not truly been lost, only waiting. The year was 1975. The place, Hawaii, And from the day Hokula first touched the sea, everything began to change. But there was a challenge. The canoe had been built. The people had gathered. The wind was ready, yet something vital was still missing. No one knew how to sail her. Because for all the reverence for the past and the love of the islands, the actual art of Polynesian navigation, reading swells, stars, birds, clouds, and sun, had vanished from living memory in Hawaii. The chants remained, the stories lingered, but no one knew how to read the sea anymore. And so, the search turned west. Thousands of miles across the Pacific, in the tiny Micronesian island of Satawal, lived a man named Maupiailug, the last master navigator trained in the traditional ways, one of the few living links to a time when the stars were roads and the ocean a map. Mau had never been to Hawaii. He was not ethnically Polynesian, but his ancestors had followed the same currents, believed in the same rhythms of sea and sky. And more than that, he remembered. He remembered how to see without instruments. He remembered how to feel direction in the water, how to watch the rise of stars and know where they would lead. He remembered the sacred. And so, with deep humility and purpose, Mau was invited to Hawaii to teach a new generation what had been forgotten. It was not easy. Language was a barrier. So was culture. Mau came from a world where knowledge was guarded, passed down only to chosen sons. In Satawal, he had been initiated as a Palu, a navigator of highest rank, through sacred rites and years of training. But Mau saw something in the Hawaiians, a hunger for truth, a fire of identity. And so he gave what few men ever had. He shared. He sat in the canoe and trained young Hawaiians in the old way, using the etak system, a form of dead reckoning that uses the relative position of stars and imaginary reference islands to track movement. He taught them how to read the swells, the long, low waves that speak of distant lands, how to watch for seabirds at dawn and dusk, how to smell land before it's seen, how to trust the rhythm of the ocean, to feel when a course is true. And then the voyage. In 1976, Hokula set sail from Hawaii to Tahiti. No GPS, no compass, no modern navigational tools, only the stars, the wind, and Mau's ancient knowledge. It was the first traditional Polynesian deep-sea voyage in centuries. As the canoe glided across the Pacific, islanders along the route gathered by the thousands. For many, it was the first time seeing a voyaging canoe in their lifetime, a living symbol of pride, of ancestry, of memory restored. When Hokula arrived in Tahiti, tens of thousands welcomed her. Flowers were thrown, tears were shed, chants rose like smoke into the sky. It wasn't just a boat arriving. It was a people returning. That single voyage ignited a renaissance. Across Polynesia, the spark caught fire. In Hawaii, traditional hula and language began to flourish again. Young people asked questions about their past. Canoe building resumed. Navigators were trained. And Mau, he returned to Satawal, but his legacy endured. The knowledge he passed on would blossom into new generations of wayfinders like Nainoa Thompson, the first Hawaiian to master traditional navigation in modern times. Nainoa would go on to guide Hokulea across thousands of miles, honoring Mau with every course he plotted, every star he followed. But the story didn't end with that first voyage. Hokulea sailed again and again, to Samoa, to Aotearoa, to Rapa Nui, and eventually around the entire world. In 2013, Hokulea began her most ambitious journey yet, a circumnavigation of the Earth, called Malama Hanua, to care for the Earth. Over 4 years, she visited over 150 ports in 23 countries, spreading a message of cultural pride, ecological stewardship, and the power of indigenous knowledge. From the vast blue of the Pacific to the crowded harbors of New York, Hokulea showed the world that ancestral wisdom still matters, that there is power in memory, in tradition, in sailing not just with tools, but with trust. And always above her, the stars shone, quiet, unchanged, waiting for those who could still read their language. Today, children in Hawaii learn the constellations of their ancestors. Canoes like Makali and Te-Ora sail again. Master navigators are honored. And Mau's gift, once almost lost, now flows again through the Pacific like a long-lost current rediscovered. The stars had never stopped singing. We had only forgotten how to listen, but now the ocean hums again. And far from fading, the legacy of the Polynesian Navigators has become something even more powerful, a living journey, a reclamation of dignity, a song of return. But even now, one final journey remains, not over sea or land, but into the heart, to ask what these voyages mean, not just for Polynesians, but for all of us, because every one of us at some point becomes a voyager. Next, what it means to voyage, the legacy, and the dream. There is something about the ocean that asks questions, not with words, but with silence. You stand at the shore, and the waves move endlessly before you. They seem to say, "Where are you going? Why do you seek? What are you searching for out there that isn't already within?" To voyage is not simply to move from island to island. It is to confront the deep, both the water and the self. When the Polynesians set out on their canoes, they were not fleeing, not wandering, not guessing. They were voyaging with intent. They knew their past. They imagined a future. And the space between those two truths was where the ocean lived. In that space, the legacy of the navigator was forged. To navigate without instruments, to trust only your body, your memory, your intuition, is an act of radical faith. Faith in the stars, faith in the stories, faith in yourself. It is easy now, in the age of satellites and smartphones, to forget what it meant to sail the Pacific without steel or script. But that act, the act of looking at the horizon, gathering the family, stepping into a carved canoe, and saying, "Yes, we go now," that act echoes louder than most realize, because it was never just a physical voyage. It was a cultural one, a spiritual one, a confirmation that the world is not too vast, that we are not too small, that the ancestors were not wrong, that we can leave home and still belong. Today, when we speak of the Polynesian legacy, we must remember that it lives in two places. First, in the tangible, the canoes rebuilt, the star paths mapped once more, the apprentices trained, the chants revived. But second, and perhaps more powerfully, in the internal journey it inspires in each of us. Because you don't have to be Polynesian to be a voyager. You don't need a canoe. You only need the willingness to set out, to move toward the unknown, guided by memory and hope, even if the path is uncertain. This is the deeper meaning of the revival. For many Pacific Islanders, the return of traditional navigation rekindled more than just knowledge. It restored identity. After centuries of colonization, assimilation, and shame, imagine growing up hearing that your people were primitive, that your ancestors were lucky drifters, that your language was a barrier, not a treasure. And then, imagine seeing a canoe built in the old way, guided by ancestral knowledge, arrive at your shore. It tells a different story. It says, you come from greatness. It says, you carry stars in your blood. It says, you are not lost. That is the power of reclaiming the voyage. In every island across Polynesia, a quiet revolution began. Language schools opened. Elders were honored. Oral traditions gained new value. Young people stopped asking, "What did we lose?" and began asking, "What can we remember?" In the West, where knowledge is often written in books, we forget that some knowledge lives in the body. A navigator's eyes must memorize the sky, but his muscles must memorize the sea. His spirit must learn patience. His hands must feel the wind like a whisper, telling secrets no machine can measure. This embodied wisdom, passed from heart to heart, across fires and oceans, is not inferior to modern science. It is simply different, rooted in rhythm, in kinship, in silence. When Hokulea sailed around the world, it did not boast, it did not claim superiority. It simply reminded the world of something ancient, that there are many ways of knowing, and some of the most powerful have no words, only chants, only hands passing tools, only stars gliding through memory like birds returning home. For the navigators, there is no finish line. Each voyage leads to another. Each island reached is only the beginning of another story. Even now, new canoes are being built. Children are learning to sail by starlight. The language of the sea is alive again. But more than that, the voyage now includes all of us. Because in the end, to voyage is a metaphor. It is the path we all take through grief, through growth, through discovery. Some days we drift. Some days we steer. Some days we are lost. And some days we find that we have known the way all along. That's what the Polynesians knew, that the stars are not just lights, they are guides. That land is not just where we live, it is where we return. That ancestors are not just past, they are present, breathing with us in the ocean wind. We are not the first to sail. We will not be the last. But we, like them, are called to journey. And every voyage, if done with purpose, brings us closer to home. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, think of them, the quiet ones, sitting at the front of the canoe, eyes fixed on a horizon you cannot yet see. They are watching for the stars. They are listening to the ocean. And in their silence, they are teaching us how to begin again. Next, Night over the Pacific, a meditation beneath the stars. The sky above the Pacific is not just dark, it is deep. There's a quietness here that speaks louder than any storm. A velvet hush where even the stars seem to drift slower, like they, too, are resting after a long journey. The waves roll beneath your canoe, a cradle of rhythm and memory. They do not speak in language, but in feeling. And tonight, they are calm. You are lying back, perhaps in the narrow belly of a double-hulled canoe, looking up, and all around you is open ocean. The sails are still. The paddles rest. The night has taken over. And so begins the meditation, the navigator's prayer, a time not for movement, but for listening. Above, the stars tell their old, patient story, and beneath them, we remember how to be small, and how, in being small, we are somehow complete. Let me take you there. Imagine you are a voyager, thousands of miles from home, halfway between the known and the unknown. No compass, no lights, only you, the canoe, and the eternal ceiling of stars above. The air is warm, kissed by salt and time. You feel the ocean breathing underneath, a slow inhale, a gentle exhale, like the pulse of the earth herself. You listen, not just with your ears, but with your bones. You hear the direction of the swells, curling in from the southeast. You sense the faintest change in wind temperature, promising a shift before morning. You notice how the stars rise slightly askew tonight, meaning the canoe may need to adjust her bearing by a hand width of rope. This is navigation, not with tools, but with total presence. The stars are not distant, cold fires. They are companions. There is Hanyakamalama, the Southern Cross, low to the horizon. There is Hokupa'a, the North Star, fixed and steady. There is Ki Ka O Makali, the Baler of Makali, known elsewhere as Orion's Belt, its handle scooping across the sky like an ancient cup of memory. And then there is Venus, the morning star, bright, defiant, blazing just before dawn. For many navigators, Venus is not just a marker. It is a promise. Keep following me, it says. You are not lost. This is how it has always been. On nights like this, the canoe becomes more than wood and lashings. It becomes a temple, a floating shrine where the navigator offers his attention as a sacred act. He sees the starline he is following. He sees the starline that will rise in 2 hours. And he sees the starline that waits at dawn, his compass, drawn across the heavens. It is in these long, quiet hours that memory awakens. The navigator thinks of his teacher, perhaps Mao, perhaps someone older, perhaps a grandfather who once whispered directions over a fire. He thinks of chants, rhythms that align with the sky. He repeats them under his breath, each syllable a lifeline to something older than the sea itself. And when the mind stills and the canoe drifts silent, he becomes part of the ocean. Not above it, not on it, of it. Can you feel that? Even as you listen now, you're drifting too. Your breath slows, your muscles soften, the images in your mind grow quieter, like lanterns floating further down a stream. You are there with the navigator, with the stars, with the sea. And you realize there is nothing more to do. Just observe, just receive, just be. That's what the Polynesian night voyage teaches us. Not everything must be conquered. Not every moment needs action. Some are meant for watching, for honoring the dance of cosmos and current, for trusting that the direction will reveal itself, even in darkness. Especially in darkness. This night, this sky, it's not unique to the Pacific. These same stars once watched over ancient Greeks in their olive boats, over Egyptian traders floating the Nile, over Norsemen threading through the fjords, over Bedouins crossing dunes. The sky is the great unifier. It speaks no language, and yet every people have understood it. In the heart of the Pacific, the navigator lies back and lets the stars do their work. He trusts. That is the secret, not the chance, not the ropes, not even the knowledge. It's the trust. Trust in the stars. Trust in the canoe. Trust in the teachings. And when he closes his eyes for a moment of rest, he dreams not of land, but of motion, of the journey continuing, of being held in the great blue breath between islands. So now, dear listener, as you lie in your own space, perhaps in a quiet room, or curled on a sofa, or slowly blinking in the glow of your screen, you are voyaging too. Not by sea, but through time, through story, through the hush of a remembered world. Let the stars rise around you. Let the sea cradle you. Let the rhythm of this ancient night fold around your thoughts like a warm kapa cloth. You are safe here. You are sailing still, and the navigator watches the sky, so you don't have to. Close your eyes. Let the ocean carry you. Sleep gently, the voyage continues. Next, the return home, islands on the horizon dawn is approaching. There is a pale line gathering in the east, not yet sun, but the first breath of it. A softening of the stars, a warm exhale of gold that begins to dust the sky. The navigator rises. His eyes scan the sea like they have done for days, weeks, maybe more. And then he sees it. Not land, not yet, but something only he would notice. A reflection in the underside of the clouds, a faint, warm blush. Land glow. This is how the old ones knew, before the mountains showed themselves, before a single leaf or bird was seen. The island revealed itself in sky and sea. In the way the waves changed, the patterns in the flight of frigate birds, the color of the clouds. He turns to his crew. He speaks no command, only nods. They know. They paddle. And with each pull of the oar, the memory of 1,000 voyages stirs in the sea. You have to imagine it. the feeling after weeks at sea. The salt crusted into your skin, the stars etched into your thoughts, the songs you sang when the wind failed, the trust you gave the canoe, and the trust she gave back. And now a shape on the horizon, a ridge, a green smear rising from the water like a memory becoming real. The island, home or a new home, it doesn't matter. To the voyager, both are sacred. The navigator feels the ache of the journey in his limbs, but he also feels something else, a lifting, a quiet exhale of triumph. He has done what the ancestors did. He has read the sea like a book and followed the sky like a trail. He has remembered, and in doing so, he has ensured that others will remember too. The canoe glides closer. Soon the smell of earth, of flowers, of wet stone will reach them. Soon birds will circle above. Soon they will step onto land and feel it beneath bare feet, steady, solid, humming with life. But before that, one more moment of silence, a kind of farewell to the sea, a thank you, because the ocean was never the enemy. It was the path, and what a path it was. To those who waited ashore, the children, the elders, the ones who kept fires burning at night, the sight of a returning canoe brings tears. It is not just a vessel. It is proof that the old knowledge still lives, that it can carry us forward. Flags rise, drums sound, but even in celebration, there is reverence. The navigator steps ashore last. He touches the earth. He bows his head. And in that moment, something ancient stirs again, a memory that stretches all the way back to the first canoe, the first departure, the first dream. We came from the sea. We returned to it. And now we return from it, wiser, whole. This is the story of every return, whether from voyage or from forgetting, whether from exile or from doubt, whether from 1,000 years of silence or a single night of sleep. The Polynesians knew the return was never the end. It was a continuation, a folding back of time, like the curl of a wave returning to the ocean that made it. When the canoe comes home, the stories grow. Children climb aboard, running their hands along the wood. They ask questions. They chant the names of stars. They imagine themselves one day taking the helm. Elders smile. They've seen this before. They know now that the knowledge will not fade again. Not while the sea is still blue, not while the sky still turns. The navigator removes his necklace of shells, a sign of completion, and places it in the hands of a student. The student bows. A new circle begins. And you, gentle listener, you have returned too. Through this long and gentle journey, you voyaged across the Pacific, not with sails, but with sound, not with charts, but with story. You felt the heartbeat of the sea, the warmth of island fire, the thrill of landfall. You've traveled far, farther than many ever will. And now you are home, wherever that is. Perhaps you're lying in your bed, eyes half closed. Perhaps the world outside is quiet, the hour late. Perhaps you hear your own breath rising and falling like a tide. Let yourself feel it. Let the journey settle into your bones. Let the peace of return carry you into rest, because that is the final lesson of the navigator. That rest is sacred. That quiet is power. That arrival is its own kind of song. Sleep now, voyager. You've crossed the sea. You've remembered the stars. And in the stillness of this night, the ancestors smile. They see you. They welcome you home. Next, final section. The stars remain a soft farewell and reflection. The sea is behind us now. The canoe rests on the sand, its hull damp with memory. The paddles are stilled, the sails folded. The journey has reached its quiet shore, and yet the stars remain. High above, undisturbed by waves or time, they continue their endless drift across the sky, slow, serene, ancient. They are not concerned with where we came from. They do not demand we remember every name. They only ask that we look up and feel something. Something older than worry, softer than fear, something like peace. As you lie there now, warm and safe, the stars are above you too, though perhaps behind clouds or painted across your memory. Still, they are there, and they have watched over every voyager before you. Moi, who fished up islands with his magic hook. Cube, who struck out from Hawaii and found Aotearoa waiting in mist. The nameless ones who braved the dark with nothing but rhythm in their chest and starlight in their eyes. They are all part of this story, but so are you, you who listened, you who imagined, you who stayed with this journey through silence and stillness, letting history unfold like a sail catching the wind. You are not an outsider here. This ocean, these stars, this story, they belong to all of us. Because every human being at some point must voyage. Not by canoe, perhaps, but through heartbreak, through discovery, through leaving and returning. We all have our sea, and we all, in time, learn to read our own sky. Some nights will be stormy. The swells will confuse you. The clouds will cover your guides. But even then, the stars remain just behind the veil, waiting for you to see again. They are patient, so very patient, like the wisdom of the ancestors. They do not shout, they whisper. You may hear them in a breeze on a quiet morning, in the hush between raindrops, in the echo of a chant you've never learned, but somehow recognize. You may hear them now, faintly, under your breath, humming like a lullaby in a language you don't need to understand. Just feel it. Let it wash through you. Let the salt and story settle into your dreams. The Polynesian Navigators knew something we often forget in the noise of modern life. That true knowing does not come from control, but from attention. That the path is not always straight, but it is always there. That rest is part of the journey, not a pause, not a break, but a sacred step. And now it is time for that step. Time to close your eyes. Time to drift gently like a canoe on calm waters. There is no rush. The stars are not going anywhere. Neither is the story. It will be here tomorrow, and the next night, and long after your worries have blown away like clouds over an island morning. So sleep, dear one. You've earned it, and while you sleep, Know that someone, somewhere, is still watching the horizon, still listening to the sea, still whispering the names of the stars. For as long as people voyage, the story lives on. As long as we remember to look up, the way will always be found. And even in your dreams tonight, should you find yourself drifting once more, know this: you are not lost. You are voyaging. You are guided, and the stars remain. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sailing with me. Sleep well, Voyager. Until next time, Sherry.